crouch down. No, that doesn't work. Okay, hi. Thank you for participating in this fun adventure that I'm sharing with you. I've been all over the world. First off, a little bit of background is, and some of you may know that about 15, 16 years ago, I got involved with the International Bird Rescue and volunteered there and have for some time. And that's when I really became a birder. Before that, I just had no idea what birds are all about, honestly. But I started volunteering there, and of course, their focus is on rehabilitating sick, injured, orphaned, and oiled aquatic birds that want to be in and around water. And that's sort of where I've just had my focus is on aquatic birds. And of course, I've always said that if you love something, as I do, then you want to take care of it. And so I got involved with an organization called Heal the Bay, because their focus is on water quality off the Southern California coast, but by extension, the world's oceans. And so if you want to take care of the oceans, then of course, or excuse me, birds in general, then of course you want to be involved with the Audubon Society. So I've got very active in Audubon. And then of course, if you care about life on our planet, then you want to get involved and be aware of and perhaps preach to the choir sometimes on the issues related to climate change. And so that's sort of the breadth of my interest, but basically the center of it is aquatic birds. And so I said, gee, there's some interesting ones out there. Let's go and see some of them. And one of my first major voyages was to Antarctica. And of course, once you've seen penguins, you can't unenjoy them. They're just absolutely fascinating creatures. So I want to share a little bit about them and what they do and how they do it. But I see if I can get this to advance the way I want it to. Okay, for some reason it's not advancing. Oh, here we go. Wait a minute, this should work. There we go. Okay. I'd like to take a look at birds, not so much as identification, as much as understanding a bird and their behavior, with a focus on natural conditions and viewing the behavior as an evolutionary adaptive trait. So just to say that this is not a bird identification presentation and how many birds can we name in 15 minutes or what have you, but it's really trying to understand the behavior and how they live. So I'm going to start at the very basics. What are penguins? Generally, of course, they're a bird. And when we think of a penguin, this is sort of what we look for, black back and what have you. But there are many different types of species of penguins, but they do all look similar on the inside. The thing about this, for example, let me get this thing working here so I can get my laser pointer going here. Is you think they got a short, stubby neck, but they don't. They have a very long neck. And the interesting thing about now this particular drawing, which is by a wonderful artist, that shows the arms, well, the wings, but what makes penguins different is because they use their wings to fly underwater, that while they have joints here, the joints provide no ability to move within the joint. In other words, they're not fused, but they are just immobile. And so it's like this one bone, there's the only place they can flex their wing is at the shoulder. They can't, while this joint still exists, it is not, there's no movement in those joints. So they're different in that way. Of course, they have long tail, etc. But they're all in this sort of shape and size. And here's an example, a better shot, but smaller, of the skeleton of a penguin. You see, they have basically the same structure, but you notice here there's long bones, but there are just no joints, long neck and what have you. So they're basically all the same shape, but they do come in various sizes. Now, this is the largest penguin, called the emperor penguin. And of course, they're very hard to find, and I haven't seen one in my life yet. And then there's one way off that wouldn't even show up, and that's the smallest one is called a little blue penguin, and they're right about here in if you can see my cursor, they're very small. and then a number in between. And this isn't all the species of them, but it gives you an idea that the size of the tallest one and the shortest one, there's quite a range of penguins. But again, they sort of all look similar, but they are distinctively different. I did find one penguin in my journeys that this did not seem right, but somehow it managed to survive. And how there ever was a headless penguin, I don't know, but clearly this picture is crystal clear and there's something wrong with this bird, but he seemed to have survived. But they all have a tough, non-skid feet so that they can walk on ice, and then these long toenails that they use, of course, for traction and things like that. And the reason for just the general shape of their feet is that they want to preserve their body heat. And of course, when they're walking on ice, obviously it'll cool them down more than they would want to. So that it's very adaptive in terms of their behaviors. And even rockhopper penguins, which we'll see, have basically the same shape and size, proportional size of their feet. All three toes, although there is a little vestige and way in the back of the fourth toe, much like a duck or something like that, much smaller. But they're fantastic in their physiology and adaptive to this. They are great swimmers, great divers, and they can dive down very, very deep. I think that a king penguin can dive down to 300 feet, and just long, and they can stay underwater for 2 minutes, 3-4 minutes at a time. And of course, they're completely waterproof because of the way their feathers interlock on their body to keep them waterproof. Example of waterproofing, a great shot of southern rockhoppers in the water. And what we call that, and here's one with chin strap, and we call this porpoising. Of course, you've probably heard the term. So these penguins are called porpoising, but I'd rather that penguins would be called, porpoises should be said that they're penguining, as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, they're very adaptive. And they actually, because they do this, they can swim faster. That is, get from point A to point B faster, because they can move through the air this brief period of time faster than they can through the denser water. There are really 5 general types of penguins. There's the large penguins, and that's the king penguin and the emperor penguin we saw on that chart. And there is the small penguin, the little blue penguin I mentioned. And then there are other general types. For example, these are crested penguins, and we're going to see some examples of each one of these. But there are rockhoppers, red-crested, and royal penguins fall into this category. And all they have these fancy crests and feathers, what have you. And they're all generally the same family. And then there's another general type of penguin, which includes Adeli's, chinstrap, and gentoo, which we'll see. And these are the brush-tailed penguins. They have this long tail that go on the, sometimes rubs on the ground. And so that's another category, general category. And then we have the banded penguin. And again, there are 4 of those. And they all have this general scoop around here, around the top of the head, this band. And now some of the rest of it can vary somewhat, but generally speaking, you can very easily determine that this is a banded penguin. So, okay, we'll get into more detail on the specifics of these animals, but just to give you a little just general background on penguins. Now, what do they eat? And the example I've shown is this is krill. And of course, krill is worldwide, but in the Antarctic waters, or what we call the Southern Ocean, krill are very common by millions of tons actually out there. But there's krill in the Arctic and generally every place in between. They're very commonly eaten by the baleen whales. But you can see these little things, and here's a better picture, my hand here showing you the size. And these Antarctic krill are one of the smaller species of krill, but of course the penguins will eat them, and the whales and down there, whatever, all eat them by the tons. But other penguins do eat fish and squid. I did not take these photos. One of the few that in this presentation that I haven't, but they do eat fish and squid, and of course they're quite common in the more northern part of the Southern Ocean, where the water is just a little bit warmer. They have, of course, the ability to grab onto a fish and hold onto it, and you can see that while they don't have teeth, birds don't have teeth. And let me tell you, as someone who rehabilitates birds and picks them up and holds them while someone else does something, takes their temperature or what have you, I am glad that birds don't have teeth. Believe me, it's bad enough to be bitten by a gull that has the same kind of sawtooths on their bill, but it's very, and of course, I'd have to say at International Bird Rescue, because they don't have teeth, we save a lot of money because we don't need a dentist or an orthodontist on staff. And so we're grateful that they don't have teeth. So why is some penguin poop pink and some white? Is because the pink poop is from krill and the white is from fish. And there's a way now we're doing with satellites to determine what kind of penguins are in what location from the satellite just by looking at the color of their poop, and then they can make some rough estimates as to how many penguins are there by looking at how much poop is in this particular area, mainly because it kind of goes away during the winter months and things like that. So some is pink and some is white. These are rock hoppers here on the rocks. Or, no, excuse me, these are adeles, I think. And but they again, that gives you an indication that these are all these penguins are eating krill, and so that's why it is this color. So enough of that. Generally speaking, how do they live their lives? Now, this is a colony, and we're going to see more of these king penguins in the small island, comparatively speaking, called South Georgia, and it's right off still in the Southern Ocean, but it's not part of the Antarctic Peninsula, where this particular colony, which we'll see more of. They estimated that there were 180,000 king penguins in this colony. Well, I didn't believe them, and so I started counting. And I got up to about 170,000, and one of them moved, and I had to start over again. So I took their word for it that there were 180,000 penguins. But the way they live their lives is in an annual cycle. And I'm going to give you 3 examples, not so much, to give you the details, but rather the different annual cycles that 3 different species have. And you look at this is the emperor penguin. Of course, this is the largest one. I have to use this photo because I haven't seen them. But they lay their eggs in the winter here, okay. In winter they may, and they lay their eggs, and then of course they rear their chicks, and then the chicks fledge, and then it's still warm enough and they can molt their feathers. And of course, every bird replaces every feather every year. And so this is a period when, if they're molting, they cannot forage. That is, they can't go in the water. And so it has to be a warmer part of the year, and they have to be able to bulk up enough to where they can go for 6 weeks or so, or 4 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the species, without eating. And so this is, a stressful time, and replacing all those feathers, because they replace every feather during this period of time, takes a lot of energy and a lot of metabolic energy and whatever, but so they really have to bulk up. And then they're foraging more, because then they get and create in their settlement, and that is they move to a location where they want their colony, and then they go through this process of laying eggs and things. So it's a very straightforward 1, 2, 3, 4 process, but includes the eggs and the fledging, but then the molting, which they got to get out of the way before they can begin the next part of their process. So this is the king penguin. Looks relatively straightforward. The Galapagos penguin, on the other hand, it lives up in at the equator, and they lay eggs year round, and they rear their chicks year round. And so an individual bird may be at one stage and another one right next to them will be in another stage. They have this period of molting here and then another period of molting here, which they would molt. One set of birds would be molting at this point, some others would be there. And all the time they're foraging around the colony. So there's because it's warm and they can molt whenever they want, and they can forage pretty much anytime they want, etc., that they have much more flexibility in what they do, and much of it is determined by the actual weather. In other words, what's happening, not so much the climate and the big picture like you see in Antarctica, but really what is going on. So their annual cycle is much more flexible on an individual bird basis, which is kind of interesting, unlike many birds. And then here's so notice that the chick rearing and the egg laying process. Now the king penguin now is really strange because they go through this process, but they overlap some of these processes. So the molting and the foraging and things like this and the settlement. So theirs is somewhere in the middle between very strict protocol, if you will, and very flexible and in the middle. And so the king penguin is unique because they have these overlapping processes, which is sort of a hybrid of the extremes. So these are the things that they have to do. They have to molt every year. They have to replace, of course, they want to lay eggs every year. They have to spend a lot of time rearing the chicks and foraging, going out to get food and whatever. And then they have to, of course, when the settlement is, find a mate or reunite with a mate and things like that. So they have these basic processes in their annual cycle, but depending upon the individual species, those cycles can and are different. There's a great book I've got that shows you every penguin's annual cycle, but these are the sort of the extremes on one end or the other, and then sort of what is more typical. Just to give you an idea, the nests that they build and are very crude. That is, they create a circle of rocks, and Adelies are especially great at this. But the fact is that there aren't enough rocks to go around. And so it's fun to stand there and watch. And I had a chance to do this, spend about 20 minutes watching. And these birds, when they're building their nests or just maintaining their nest, they steal from one another. When the other guy isn't looking, they'll reach over to his nest and grab it and put it in his nest. And it's kleptomania, I don't know, but nevertheless, a lot of their behavior, the actual action during some of this period, is actually stealing rocks from one another. So this is kind of cute, but it's just sort of a way of saying this is my territory, and they lay their egg in it. But it's pretty much almost a ritualistic process without a whole lot of real value to it. But some penguins, like this Humboldt penguin and some of the banded penguins, actually dig burrows, and they make their nest in a burrow. And of course, this is when in areas where it's warmer, and they can actually dig a burrow with those long claws and those feet and make their nest in a burrow. And here's, just to give you a shot, interesting of, here's a gentoo penguin on an egg, but the time of year when I was there, there were already way too many chicks, like here, that had grown quite a bit. And so this egg was clearly not fertile. And so why it was still, taking care of it or what have you, is probably just it was going to stick with it until it hatched and then eventually give up. But the eggs, if you look here, this is a chicken egg, just to give you an idea. And the gentoo penguin, which is one of those middle-sized penguins, this is the shape compared to the chicken egg. And up here is the king penguin, and of course that's one of the largest, with the emperor being the largest. And so its egg is much larger. Again, the interesting, and some of this is a whole topic for a whole nother period, but the shape of the egg. They're really trying to figure out why this particular bird would lay an egg that is as pointed as this is, because it's really inconsistent with its behavior compared to some of the other, like here's an albatross, a big wandering albatross egg, very round, typical egg shape, etc. So this is sort of a mystery that people are going to be worrying about. Why is that egg that shaped that way on that particular species? But just to give you an idea of relative size, this is approximately the size of a chicken egg, and then king penguin and gentoo, just to give you an idea what they look like. Again, every bird, every year, every feather. I have to tell you, taking this picture, it took me quite a while to line these 4 penguins up. And I says, okay, now you go over here and you go over here. And then, well, they started moving. I said, no, get back to where you were before. And then I says, okay, now all of a sudden I want everybody to now look up here. And you can see they're all looking in the same direction. And I snapped the picture. This was really I'm really quite proud of the ability to get these 4 penguins, because here's the worst of the molt, or getting to be the worst of the molt. And this is the best when these all done. And so this just gives you an idea of sort of what it's like. But when you go there, especially in the summer, as I did, when the molt was basically over for the adults, is that the place is just littered with feathers. Of course, they blow away and they go in the ocean and what have you, but they are it's just covered with feathers. Now, the chicks, when they are hatch and they grow, here's an excellent example of a king penguin chick. And in fact, I'll just advance to the next slide. And this is, we call them oakum boys, because the original people that saw them says they look like they're wearing like tar or something like that, the brown color. But these are chicks. And you can see, golly, they're just about as big as their parents. And that's true. They've grown very, very fast. But these are their downy feathers. And I think this guy here, he's been overfed. I mean, his parents ought to be just proud. But nevertheless, they will streamline, because eventually, at the end of their cycle, they will molt to look just like their parents. Here's a different species with chin straps, and here are the chicks, and here are the adults. And so eventually, in the next, probably in this case, probably 3 or 4 weeks, they will molt off and begin to look like their parents. And then here's the pictures just go on about. Look, here's the molting of the juveniles into the adult plumage, and all this fuzziness on the back. And then here's one that, again, they kind of got a weird haircut on this one. And then finally, I mean, how would you like to be walking around looking like that for a couple of weeks? I don't know. But nevertheless, this molting business is really quite a process. And again, it's quite a process that really requires a lot of metabolic energy to replace all these feathers. And so they need to be well fed. And of course, in this case, they have to be well fed by their parents. And I got to believe that it's an itchy business. You just have to scratch and pull them or whatever it is. But this is that process. So this is the molt, and of course the adults you saw with the 4 penguins, and then the molt from the downy feathers to the adult feathers on these juveniles. So those are basically the 2 types of molt. And of course, every year the birds replace every feather, and during that period they cannot go out in the water. They just would get cold and wet, and it would be bad. So they generally live in very large colonies. Here, this is a different colony, but again, this is probably certainly in the neighborhood of 200,000 penguins. And again, this is in a bay in South Georgia during the summer. And of course, there's still quite a bit of ice, because there's always some on the mountaintops here. But they live generally in large colonies, not some of the banded are smaller and more distributed colonies on the territory. But these are just huge numbers of penguins. like say this was again on South Georgia. There's a lot of snow, and they would say "excuse me" as they walked by one another in this trench. But they do develop these pathways through the ice from one part of the colony to another, and they can live together. This shows only king penguins. Here's a photo of a king penguin and a gentoo penguin in the same area, two species in one photo. And here's another two species, one photo for a king and a royal, and this was taken in Macquarie Island, which is off the south coast, the coast of New Zealand, with the king and a royal penguin. And then here's one where I got three penguins. Here's the gentoo, very distinctive with his orange bill here. The king penguin, which is just gorgeous bird here, all whatever. And then the chin strap, because he has a chin strap. So again, they do, but there will be a dominant species in the colony. And then some guys are just hanging around with their friends because they will not be breeding in these small numbers. But this is a pretty good example with the gentoos, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that kind of thing, and then there's a whole army of king penguins. I just threw this in because anywhere in the colony you will see this kind of thing going on. Of course, birds die, natural causes or else, and we'll talk more about the threats in a moment. But you look at it and says, well, you know, is this a relative or anything? No, it's just curious, and I happened to snap the picture at the right time to see what one could think of anthropomorphically as a mourning type of behavior. So colonies, thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of penguins all in one place. So what are the threats that to the population of penguins in the world? Why, what do they have to worry about? And have adapted to? Well, no, this is the wrong pole. You never see a penguin and a polar bear at the same time. So, although some people might think you might, but one of the main threats that they have in the Southern Ocean and birds everywhere are killer whales, and they will chase. They kind of cheat because they hunt in packs, and they can corral them, and they can charge the ice flow that they might be on and get them. But they're obviously a very severe predator to penguins. There aren't a lot of them down there, but enough to where the penguins are wary of them. This is a photo I took showing the what we call spy hopping behavior of orcas, where they just look up and they look around for a few seconds and then turn around and come and drop back down again. And so he saw me on the boat, and I waved at him, and he waved back at me, and I wished him well, and he went on. But the reason, of course, they're a severe or significant predator is because of these teeth. And so this makes them, in fact, they are clearly the top predator in the world's oceans. They will they mercilessly will take on, as a pair, they'll take on a great white shark, a very large great white shark, two of them sort of ganging up and feasting basically on the liver of the great white shark. So ferocious predator, but not the most significant predator to penguins in the Southern Ocean. Is the leopard seal, and these guys are. It doesn't show very well in the picture, but this is about 12 feet long. It's quite a large seal compared to what we see in our neighborhood. You think, well, and he's got this really interesting face. And so they are the primary threat to penguins, and they are in warmer waters. So anything, I think probably any any of the penguins, I haven't thought about this way, but except for the Galapagos penguin, which lives up in the at the equator, I think all of them are subject to predation by leopard seals. There may be a couple places where they aren't, but I'm pretty sure, because I know they're in the tip of South America where we see penguins. I know they are off the coast of South Africa where we see the South African penguins, and certainly all the way around the oceans where we see the other species. So they're a formidable predator wherever they are. And with just, I think only one, maybe two exceptions, all penguins worry about this creature. And this is the reason why you care. These teeth, of course, huge canine teeth or whatever, are for, and you notice the very, very interesting teeth here, because they not only will eat the penguin, but they can also eat krill. Though they eat the krill, or they can eat the krill after it's been into the penguin. And then so it's, but you can just see the very unique teeth that they can use to sift krill, take a big mouthful, and then, if you will, spit out the water and capture the krill. So very unusual creature, these leopard seals. Here's what they look like from at water level, and here's another. Oh, excuse me. And this is, this is the last thing that a penguin wants to see is a leopard seal. There are a couple of other critters that live down there as well. Sea lions, not unlike the ones that we see here in California. But there's sea lions down there, and they will attack penguins and eat them. And in fact, this I noticed that there aren't any youngsters, and so I left this slide in. This is pretty clearly an attack by a sea lion, because a leopard seal would have just basically bitten it in half, more or less. That's not exactly the way they eat, but that, and so this, we see this kind of a wound on brown pelicans at International Bird Rescue once in a while. And it's we know it's a sea lion bite. It's not as severe as this, but we do get in pelicans that we can see that they were bitten by a seal, but they have survived. And so while this sea lion is formidable, we don't know why, because in Southern California, because they don't eat them as a matter of course, they eat fish exclusively, but why some reason they attack here, the pelicans attack the sea lions attack the brown pelicans for no apparent reason. So, this guy probably survived. And then again, we're talking about threats. This guy looks like he rubbed up against somebody, and this guy looks like he rubbed up against him, because this is just blood from some other bird that is on this feather. But I thought it was kind of an interesting photo to take. You see eggs on the ground once in a while like this, and it was eating by something, and probably a bird called a skua, and they attack. This happens to be a royal penguin colony in south of New Zealand, and they will eat eggs and chicks, and their mouth is big enough to where they can pick up the egg and fly away with it. And so this is disturbing for us to see, but of course it's part of the natural process, and there's evolutionary pressures on both animals to try and prevent the predation, or in fact to enhance the predation. So this is another threat to primarily to chicks and to eggs of certain colonies of penguins. This is another bird called a southern giant petrel, and this is a very large bird, probably a 7 or maybe a slightly larger foot wingspan. And they're a tube nose like albatross and petrels and other things like that. But they do not attack penguins per se, but they will, if it's one that is wounded or a carcass or whatever, they are, they're sort of the condor of the lore, where they will eat just about anything. And it doesn't necessarily need to be dead before they will attack it. And here again is a picture of them with a white morph, southern giant petrel. So they're amazing creatures, but they're sort of as an aside. Now, those are basically the natural predators have been going on for millions of years. But early on in the last 2 centuries, whaling whaling has been a severe, to some degree, has an impact on penguins. And that's because the whalers, when they had to fill up a barrel of blubber, or that is whale oil, that they would, if they had to top it off, they'd grab a couple of penguins and throw them in the pot and boil away their fat and top them off. And so there were quite a few, not dramatically, but quite a few penguins that were actually harvested, if you will, during the whaling period. There's also, of course, some anecdotal stories about people lost down there and who ate for like 2 years nothing but penguins, because that was all there was to eat before they were saved. Overfishing is a big problem, especially these days with krill. Although the issue of how much krill is down in the Southern Ocean is really hard to judge, because when the whalers killed a lot of whales, those whales were eating krill, and so theoretically the whaling population went down. Therefore, the krill volumes went up, which would be good for the penguins. But we're not sure how that has worked, because now when the whales are coming back, because we're not killing them, there still seems to be enough krill for everybody to do well. So we're not sure how much, but we do know that there's enough overfishing in krill right now to where we need to watch it and see how much it is, because it could have an effect. And then with more whales now down there also eating the krill, it may impact the population of penguins that do eat it. So, and then of course, once in a while, one will get caught up in a net or something like that. And then another threat to penguins is oil. And there's 2 things that we use. There's what we call chronic oiling, and this is where ships will dump their ballast, or their bilge water, excuse me, that contains oil in a territory, an area of the ocean that has penguins in it, and that's right off the central South America and the east coast of South America, where there's a large colony of Magellanic penguins. And for some reason or another, right along that coast, but about 10 or 15 miles off, is where freighters and things like that will just dump their bilge, which contains oil, and pollute the water there, and then penguins will get into that oil and it can kill them. Also, that same kind of process is going on in South Africa and affecting the population of South African penguins. Same process. And again, sometimes these are fishing boats and what have you, which is a big problem there for penguins as well. And so this is something that is, because people can do it and they need to clean out their bilges and stuff like that, and they just do it, and it is really quite a problem in certain areas to certain species of penguins. And then there was in a classic where, again, bird rescue, International Bird Rescue was involved, was there was in 2001, in Cape Town, South Africa, there was a ship that ran aground, and it was a bulk oil carrier, but its fuel, like all fuels of these big ships, is basically crude oil. It's lightly refined, but it's basically crude oil, and they spilled thousands of gallons or hundreds of thousands of this, what we call bunker fuel, right near the South African penguin, one of the major South African penguin colonies. And we and others the world, but certainly under a big leadership of International Bird Rescue and others, washed the oil off 20,000 penguins. Imagine trying to wash the oil. These were the South African penguins, which are not the largest penguin, but they're still a substantial critter. And not only that, but they then relocated another over 20,000 unoiled penguins, more than 100 miles away from the spill site, so that those penguins did not get oiled. And so the whole response to this ship running aground required the movement, washing of 20,000, and the movement of 40,000 penguins away from the launch, from the spill site. So it's by far the largest oil spill bird rescue, or hopefully that ever is going to happen, and especially with a large bird. Long story, could spend a whole couple hours talking about that oil spill response in Cape Town in year 2000 and 2001. And here's a release of some of the penguins, again, far away from the spill site, and they're just heading into the water, thriving, but they had the oil cleaned off them by this large spill site. And then plastic, anywhere in the world's ocean, there is plastic, like it or not, it's just there, and we're not sure how many penguins are ingesting plastic or whatever, but most of the seabirds on the planet today do eat, inadvertently or thinking that it's food, will eat plastic. And then here's a picture I took where all this grass, this tundra kind of grass, not tundra, tussock kind of grass, was mowed down a couple of years before this picture by rabbits. And so the rabbits just were released onto this island, Macquarie Island, and they just decimated all this. And this is where these penguins make their nests. And so it affected, these rabbits affected the nesting and the colonization of these penguins. And so now, with this wonderful work that the Australians and the New Zealanders did to completely remove all the rabbits from this habitat, and now it is growing back. So sometimes these animals, penguins in this case, are affected by the fact that we as human beings bring in invasive species like rabbits or cats or rats into the environment, and it severely affects the population of the animals. But there's one story, and I'll show you the picture, believe it or not, where there was a invasive species introduced into, and this is again on South Georgia, into the environment, and appeared to have no consequence. But oops, sorry, I'm going to scoop over to, wait a minute, hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, sorry. Climate change, sea level rise, et cetera, is a big threat. Oh, warmth is a big issue. That is, if it gets too warm during the summer, then birds can die because it's too hot, and they open mouth breathe to expel the warmth. And this is the only way they don't have sweat glands. The way they control, and this is the case for a lot of birds, the way they control their interior temperature is by inhaling and exhaling to cool themselves off. And this is a classic example. They lie down on the ground and do that just to cool off. We were concerned, the community of penguin lovers, concerned that the number of Adelie penguins was dropping, because they would look at all the historical colonies and say they're just not the numbers in these colonies that there used to be. And then in 2015, roughly 14 and 15, a satellite flew over the Antarctic Peninsula and looked down and saw something strange. And they sent people down there, with drones, and they found a Adelie penguin colony, which was 5 100,000 birds. And we were worried about the population, the world's population of Adelies dropping, and apparently they were basically relocating. And this is not my photo, but I love this picture of this Adelie penguin looking and seeing, here is the drone that had been taking pictures of this colony. He's wondering, what in the world is that creature down here? But that was the good news, that the Adelie populations were not as severely impacted by climate change or anything else to threaten their world. They share, that is, the penguins share their habitat with other creatures. And of course, this is a southern elephant seal. These guys can weigh 12,000 pounds. They're huge. And here again, here's a colony, and they share that colony. Here's a sharing of a fur seal and Adelie penguins on this. And I'm thinking, what are these guys talking about? You know, they're all clustered around. You look like, hey, you know, who's that big fellow over there? Shall we invite him over? Then southern fur seals. This is a baby, probably 3 days old. And here's mom, just as proud as punch. And so again, penguins share their colonies with these fur seals. Flying over the colony will be wandering albatrosses, and there are some places like South Georgia and some where the wandering albatrosses and other albatrosses are in the same general area as a colony of rockhopper penguins, primarily, and so they're sharing the air, not the air, but so much as the water around some of these islands with even wandering albatrosses. And of course, whales. I was in a zodiac very similar to this one, or this one in the background, only I was taking the picture. And then the whale came over to us, and those people took a picture of me. And we got a really good close-ups of these humpback whales. This is, you know, this is not a telephoto lens on this camera. And then watch them goodbye. Also on some of the islands, well, on Falkland Islands, there is a falcon, and we don't think they eat any of the penguins, but they might very well be eating chicks of the humble things. And then lastly, this is a picture you'll never be able to take because they've been completely eradicated, but this is also in South Georgia. And believe it or not, at the South Pole, if you will, there were reindeer. And you say, Dave, wait a minute, that reindeer, caribou, those are Arctic animals. What are they doing down here? Well, some whalers from Norway in like 1909 or in that general said, you know, we're tired of eating fish and we're tired of eating penguins and whatever. Let's bring down some reindeer from Norway and put them on South Georgia Island. And they did. I think they started out with like 15 animals, and they ended up with 5,000. But of course, they're eating grass, and the penguins don't eat grass, and so there was no competition. But eventually, the British government said, we got to get rid of these guys. And so, believe it or not, then the Norwegians came down, and their hunters were able to dispatch this invasive species. But there are no more reindeer on South Georgia Island. I guess you could say probably there's no more reindeer in south of the equator or something like that. But this is a photo I took in 2009 while there was still quite a population of these reindeer. So where do you go to find penguins? Well, where I found them, and where they can be found, is I started out by taking a voyage to, this is of course from Ushuaia, and there are penguins up here in the southern tip of South America, down here to the Antarctic Peninsula to see kings and chinstraps and jellies, basically the colder water. Then the trip went over to South Georgia and saw those huge colonies of king penguins that I've described. Then off to the Falkland Islands up here and saw other species, and then finally back to Ushuaia. So I did that trip in 2009 and then also in 2019, about 10 years later. And this is just magnificent. And if any, you really got to do that. Of course, you got to go over Drake's Passage and what have you, and then went up into the Galapagos, New Zealand, South Africa, and so this Patagonian coast to see various species. So you kind of got to spend a lot of time around here, and then flip over to South Africa, New Zealand, and up to Galapagos to get basically the full list of species. Got on the National Geographic Explorer, went through Drake's Passage, saw lots and lots of albatrosses flying over, about 7 different species of albatross. Finally got down to the Antarctic Peninsula, just gorgeous, amazing scenery. Here's a monument that's put up to a shipwreck, kind of a ship group of guys, and these are the ones that had to eat penguins for 24 months or so. Amazing icebergs, ice flows, and things like that. So here again, the ship that I was on, launching of the Zodiacs, and here is folks getting off the Zodiac under what we call a wet landing, and that is you got to be wearing boots because you can't bring it all up. And here those huge elephant seals, and here all the king penguins, and of course here are the invasive species. Oh no, those are the passengers. And so this is part of the real experience of just finding, and you're saying right here, and you're walking, you see this 7,000-8,000 pound, 12,000 pound creatures right here, making sure that you didn't get too close to them, because if they moved, you wanted to be out of the way. But we get there and we find that the inhabitants are friendly. If you just sit down, they will come up to you. Now they say, Dave, don't go within 15 feet of the penguins. And they say, well, you got to tell the penguins that, because they are really, really curious. And these are juveniles. They still have some of their downy feather. These are not adults, but they are just very friendly, and they peck at the shoelaces or what have you. And they do seem to like spending time. There are only a couple of remaining buildings on the peninsula of Antarctica. This is Port Lacroix, which is the only place you can go that is a tourist attraction. It used to be a scientific study area, and they, through volunteers, spent 6 months a year from the British electorate protectorate, and they run a little gift shop, and you can mail a letter from there, and it will be postmarked for South Africa. From Antarctica. The only place you can get a postmarked envelope that says Antarctica on it. And they allow you to take 1 penguin home with you. And so I've had 2 trips, so I brought home two penguins with me. That's only available in that Port Lacroix, the location. So let me then say, this is kind of what they do, what are the threats, what do they eat, what do they share the planet with. So let's just go and see some more or less random birds. So we've got, of course, these are all king penguins and royal penguins. And I thought this was kind of an interesting, for some reason they had a disagreement. These guys are just not very happy with one another for some reason or another. But the very distinctive crested penguin in a rather large colony of royal penguins off of the southern coast of New Zealand. Adelie penguin, again, the classic penguin picture, very distinctive bird, just hardly, the white eye ring, and then all the black and the white. So sort of basic penguin, if you will. And then you take him and you put a chin strap around its neck, and you sort of got, of course, significantly different than that. But the chin strap is one of the few birds on the planet is appropriately named, I have to say. And so they're beautiful. Again, they like cold weather. Adelies and emperors very much so, but chin straps wanted to be fairly cold too. Whereas the gentoos seem to like it more moderate. Now they can be cold, they can be in a warmer temperature, so they can do, but they don't mind warmer weather. And again, that's probably a great adaptive trait for when we start looking at climate change. So, you know, if you're going to bet on a species, bet against the emperor, bet against Adeles, and bet for Gentoos and some of these others. Love this picture. Of course, in the background, a little disturbing, but that's the way life is. But I don't know, you know, there's no way of knowing, you know, what's going on here, but it's just, I thought, really a great picture. Here again is a erect crested penguin, only found really on one island in south of New Zealand. A beautiful bird, very, again, a crested penguin. Another endangered species, very few of them left on the planet. And these, a pair of yellow-eyed penguins, and again, still penguin, but the whole facial structure and all that, and the color is very different. Again, these are more northernly in the New Zealand archipelago, south of the South Island of New Zealand. This guy's looking right at me, and then they're interacting here. So very interesting behavior on the part of these guys. Southern rockhopper penguins, there's a northern species also. They hop rocks. I mean, it makes sense that they would do that, but they actually hop rocks. And they very rarely, and all the ones I've seen, they never put one foot in front of the other. They're always hopping. And so they kind of jump out of the water, get up, and they hop on, and their colonies are on rocky slopes. And they share, in this case, they share those rocky slopes with black-browed albatross. So you've got a place where you've got a albatross with a 7.5 foot wingspan sitting in amongst these rockhopper penguins. So that's really quite a sight to see. And then we'll go to the Galapagos. And again, I took a picture of the navigational thing to prove that it actually was at exactly on the equator at this time. And we see the Galapagos penguins. And again, you know, where else are you going to see an iguana and a penguin in the same place? And that's the Galapagos. And that's the amazing, what makes the Galapagos just absolutely amazing. So these are marine iguanas that eat algae off the rocks, submerged rocks in the ocean. And then the penguins are going to be eating fish. There are fewer and fewer Galapagos penguins on the planet every day. Overfishing is the biggest one. They're just the fishermen outside the economic zone of the Galapagos, the Ecuador, they're just way overfishing, and so these birds are just not able to secure enough food to keep their populations going. And so the Ecuadorian government is aware of this and doing everything they can to prevent poaching from foreign countries. Here's some chinstrap chicks looking fat and plump, but of course they're wet. And remember that these are not waterproof birds. Their adults are, and so they don't like it to rain. And that's a problem now with, again, climate change getting out of sync. And it's raining on these penguins when it should be snowing, because the snow just blows off the penguins, but the rain goes and soaks through to the skin and keeps them cold. So so this is just an example of you know what these chicks, they're the full size of their parents, and they'll start molting their feathers soon. So then I think this is my last slide, and I hope this works. Let's see if it does. No, it doesn't. I am not getting sound. Sure. Let me start over again. There we go. Can you hear that? Carol, could you hear that?
Yes, thank you.
Let me start, since it's brief, let me see if I can start it over, because I want you to watch for the different species of penguins, and of course you see the juveniles, but keep an eye out for another couple of species in this short movie. Let's see if we can make it happen again. Oops. Let me go back. Okay. And this, hopefully this will work. Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to stop the share. Okay.
Right.
I'm glad the sound came through okay, right?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
That's what it's like, and I remind you that that the aromas. I wish I could capture the aroma of these birds, because you know, you're walking around in mud generally, which is not only mud, and the aroma is rather remarkable, and then that constant sound and all those birds. It is really, you know, I don't know what the right term is, breathtaking, but for me it's really almost an emotional experience to be among that many large, fantastic, well-adapted birds. It's just, you know, it's a lifetime. So if you possibly can, hop on a boat and go down to the Antarctic and see these amazing creatures. Some of the others, you know, I go to Galapagos, but some of the other ones on the south, the islands off of southern New Zealand, are much harder to get to. You've got to make a, you know, like a 2.5 week commitment and get on a boat and go from island to island to island. And so it's not as easy to do, and certainly not as comfortable, but it's worth doing. But the Antarctica, and then over to South Georgia, back to the Falklands, whatever, just amazing. And I didn't show you any of the, other than a few, any of the other birds that are down there, like the flightless duck and that sort of thing, that are just amazing, and the South Georgia pipit and things like that. There are a lot of really interesting birds down there as well. So,
well, thank you. We have one question from Chuck about will penguins eat other dead penguins?
No, they're very either fish or krill or squid, but they are strictly they eat, you know, generally in the water, and will not but again, in many locations there are other predators that do, like that skua, and there's another one called the sheathbill, and whatever, that take care of the, you know, clean things up.
So it's mostly the birds then that are scavenging on the dead penguins?
Yeah, and live penguins as well, as I mentioned, the chicks and the eggs.
Yeah.
But yeah, they will peck at it, and then of course the rest of it, if there aren't enough birds to eat that, then the winter takes care of that basically, and either washes it off or what have you, and so you don't find. I showed you a couple of skeletons left, but there aren't a lot of those around that you would think. If you got 200,000 penguins, that you ought to see more. And so they're probably all basically dying at sea, and or their bones are washed off to sea. You don't see a lot of those, but it's life in the big colony, or life in the big city.
Janet Davis said
I have another one.
Really great to hear the audio. Okay, Chuck. What's your other question?
Yeah, where do the emperors come in? Where do they live?
There are about 6 or 7 colonies, and some of them are permanent, and some of them are more the nomadic ones, like the ones you saw in the March of the Penguins, if you saw that. And so there's sort of 2 answers, but they are basically, and I'd have to try and figure out a map, but if you look at the continent of the Antarctic Peninsula, and it points right up to the southern tip of South America. And in fact, there's some logic that the Andes actually go down through and then turn out to be part of the Antarctic. But that's one point. And then you go to the west around until you come to where you would go north to get to New Zealand. And so there's a broad area, probably 1,000 miles or whatever, of coastline, Antarctic coastline. And there, in about 4 or 5 different locations, there are emperor penguin colonies right on the coastline. But the big colony they showed in the March of the Penguins was inland, and they walked all that way, such that and you think you saw that movie, where the colony was established, located out sort of in the middle of nowhere, because then when the chicks hatched and grew enough and whatever to where they were going to leave and could go forage for themselves, the ice would have melted to the degree that the chicks, the fledglings, did not have to walk very far to get to the ocean. So that particular large colony, and maybe there's more than one, just evolved their behavior to where they built their colony knowing that the ice was going to melt, and when the chicks were ready to fledge, that the water would be close by. So it's all in that general area between the Antarctic Peninsula and going around to where you would go due north to New Zealand. It's along that coast where the emperors are.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, if you want to see emperor penguins, there's 2 options. One is to fly to a colony and spend the night and all that kind of thing. And I won't go into the whole details, but to do that, it's a 5-day trip, and to do that is $80,000 to do that. So I said, no, I don't think so. And then there was another trip that I dearly would like to do, but which went to travel, as I described, down to the peninsula and then around 2 emperor penguin colonies and then up to New Zealand. And they stopped on some, and that was only $65,000. And so I thought, well, you know, I've been to the New Zealand islands, and so I've seen that much, and I've been to the peninsula. So I just said, you know, golly, well, I mean, if you're going to spend $80,000 to go to an emperor penguin colony, at least you ought to be able to bring home a mating pair of emperor penguins, I should think, for that amount of money. They wouldn't listen to me.
Only.
Oh,
I have another question about the odd-shaped egg.
Yeah.
I have geese, and occasionally I get a odd-shaped egg, so it might just be that it was just an off day for that egg.
It's
just a theory.
Yeah, it would be. There's another theory, and you know, by the way, there's some great work that's going on and trying to figure out why bird eggs are shaped the way they are and why they're colored the way they are by species. And they used to think that an egg that was shaped like that with sort of a point to it, wasn't perfectly ovoid or what have you, was because there were birds that flew long distances, and they actually felt that was, although it's inside the bird for this period of time, but then might be to help their body be more aerodynamic, even though it's got an egg in the middle. Don't know whether that's where the theory is still holding water or not, but they're still trying to figure out. There's a lot of really interesting work going on why birds' eggs are shaped. Some of them are, you know, sort of like golf balls, and other ones are kind of long and pointy like a murre eggs, et cetera. And there's some really interesting work going on that.
If I listened to a webinar recently where they talked about, and I can't remember what the bird species was, but the egg turns in the ovary, in the uterus, it'll turn 180. And they were talking about how that made it elliptical.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
That while it's developing,
imaginable.
it turns.
I guess I'm trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between egg turning and a turn egging.
Totally different.
Totally. I'm sorry, the mind is warped, I guess. In any
So that
event.
was showing, like in the development of the egg, that as the shell was going on, you know, that it would turn inside the bird.
Rotated.
Yes,
Yeah.
180.
That's, who knows?
Fantastic
It is.
research.
Any other questions?
Well, we've had some comments about amazing photos, great information, and love your sense of humor.
Well, the last one, I guess, is a challenge, but nevertheless, thank you. It's my pleasure to put it together. It's again, just saying I want to put this thing together because it brings together some of the best photos of something that I'm really passionate about, and that's both the species, the family of penguins, and their history and their ancestry. You know, there was a Chuck. That penguin that was like 6 feet tall at one point. They've got the skeleton of a giant penguin. Of course, they've whatever, but it's just they're just such interesting birds, and so I appreciate the opportunity to put that presentation together.
And they're so well adapted for the ocean.
They really are
incredible.
Yes, and so it's their. In any event, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, and we thank everybody for joining us for this talk, all of you that joined us, and we hope to see you on further talks. Our next talk will be in January 2022. Thank you, Dave, ever so much.
You're
I'm going to end the meeting.
Okay.
Carol, I had a question.
Okay.
It was